When I began the year, running 1,000 miles hadn't yet dawned on me. What I really wanted was a cure to boredom and a sense of pride to fall asleep with each day. I didn't really do much to make myself proud. I was living in LA at the time and rotting away in my apartment like no 23-year-old woman should. I didn't possess the resilience to do just what I had gone to LA to do. I didn't feel special, and in order to do what I'm best at, I needed that feeling fulfilled, which is entirely selfish and lazy. Laziness feels like another word for selfishness. If I had the time to be as lazy as LA made me feel, then obviously I was very selfish with my time. The second I realized this grotesque habit, I laid in the laziness a bit longer and then decided to test my boundaries with running. My whole life I had been a runner. I was born from a runner into a family who all had some trace back to running. Some of my first inklings of pride came from the sports my dad coached me in. In softball, I couldn't throw hard, catch a pop fly, swing on time, but I, as shortstop, could reach any ball that found its way between first and third base. When it mattered, I would replace the slower runners on first base so that we had a quicker chance of scoring. I wore the pinch runner badge with pride. But softball wasn't a fast sport at all. Fall quickly became my favorite season. It meant soccer games were coming around, and this was the one sport I was glad my dad coached me in because I could apply his rigid approach to coaching because I had the endurance to run up and back and up and back and side to back to out of bounds and back. I think this is why I never was really proficient in track and field and never dared to run cross country. My brother felt like a cautionary tale for that. Each morning when I was a kid, he would wake up while it was still dark out and drive to cross country practice. I thought he might have been the first person awake that day. They always seemed torturous. Running till puking and splinting their shins till they needed rest, ice, compression, and elevation. Every Saturday during competition season, I would putter into our minivan to go watch him race. These meets seemed like a waste of a Saturday morning from a spectator's perspective. As the runners, some proficient, some pathetic, trickled through the course, I saw my brother maybe one time before we would wait for what felt like forever, which was just like 10 minutes tops, at the finish line for him to cross. What kept me from running cross country wasn't the early morning practices or the after school practices in the 95-degree heat. It was always the pain I saw the runners in at the end of their race. Once they caught their breath and had some water, they were immediately and vehemently displeased with their performance and soured the lunch at the restaurant we'd go to afterwards, the one part that I was looking forward to the entire time.
Sorry about that.
I forgive you. I thought I might be all right at cross country if I could just enforce a timeout halfway through, but I think that's defeating the entire purpose of the sport. Whatever. But I liked soccer because we were in short breaks to catch our cold breath. I had just enough asthma to need the 5 seconds it took for the ball to reach me. Obviously, I was always ahead of the game. My dad would have been obsessively upset with me if I was not the example for my teammates on the field. However, my tiny Alabama school didn't have a soccer team. So once I aged out of the recreational league, I pivoted to track and field. Long story short, I was no good at short distance because that's all it was. There was no strategy involved like there was with soccer. So after a few seasons of running the 200-meter race in the slower heats, I retired my athletic career. Occasionally, I would run during high school and college, mostly just when I noticed changes in my body and thought a 2-mile run would undo the natural progression from an underdeveloped 18-year-old to a 20-year-old. It never became a dependable habit until the summer of 2022. I remember being so upset with my then boyfriend at times that I didn't know what better to do to quit from wallowing in my apartment over a miscommunication. It didn't start as running though. It was the dramatic, I just need to go for a walk to clear my head, that fostered this habit. Eventually, I built up a tolerance for walking it off and found running to be a better distraction. Retrospectively, running has always been a cure to a mental ailment. I moved from Tennessee to LA at the beginning of 2023. Every so often I'd go for a run, but I felt the habit dwindling. I didn't really mind though. I didn't need the distraction and I was sourcing pride from work. I would run a monthly 10K just to see if I could do it, but after 3 months, the habit was fully depleted. Fast forward a summer that catapulted me into a breakup and out of a job and alone in LA, my pride was depleted congruently. For the first time in my life, nothing I was used to applied anymore. That was a strange and wildly unpleasant feeling that I always assumed I'd enjoy when I'd ponder what it'd be like to be self-employed, young, and single in LA from the aisles of my various retail jobs growing up. I wasn't needed anywhere, and it felt horrible. So I needed a bigger distraction, obviously. The best thing about LA, distraction is abundant. I found one of my favorites being an early morning drive through Laurel Canyon to Williker Park. The hills of LA looked like nothing I had ever seen before, making the recent fires even more heartbreaking to those who never experienced their glory like I had been so lucky to. I was fascinated by all the vantage points to see North and West Hollywood from. I probably hiked there 45 days in a row, when finally the urge to run found its way back for me. I hopped back into my 5Ks rather enthusiastically, enough so that I began running further than I ever had before. One thing about running longer distances was that it took up much more time in my otherwise bleak day and was a larger source of pride. I feel kind of lame for running for these reasons, but they're what got the habit to stick. I moved back home to Alabama and spent the entire summer dealing with a heartbreak and running every single day with Jacob in the trails of Red Mountain, where we were safe from the Alabama heat I scorned every summer growing up. I hated running during the hottest time of the year, but I did it anyway because the habit had already formed. Running in the summer made me disciplined in a lot of ways. I would wake up as early as possible to run before the sun baked any viable path I knew about. I drank a ton of water too, probably the only time in my entire life I've ever been properly hydrated. No matter the heat, I reluctantly knew it was the obvious thing to do. I'd never pushed myself to do something I would really rather not do. I'm usually quick to give up in the face of opposition, but each suffocatingly humid run I persisted through, I fell in love with the mental fortitude required. I started getting faster, actually. Each run, I would tell myself and Jacob through the coughs of the hits of the... Should I not say? Okay. That we would pass back and forth. I'm going slow today. It's too fucking hot. Red Mountain is an abandoned iron mine, and a huge incentive to run the first half mile as fast as possible is because the turnaround spot is at a barred mine entrance that breathed cold air around me like this. This felt like the timeout I would have loved to enforce halfway through a cross-country race. Before there were summer runs at Red Mountain, I'd never really had a reason to consider my running form. To be honest, as long as I ran without stopping, I didn't really care about form. I must have looked so fucking silly. But at the time, I was running along the beach in Santa Monica, so I didn't need to conform to the ground below me. It was straight towards Will Rogers Beach and straight back towards Santa Monica Pier. But at Red Mountain, I was running amidst, well, as the name would suggest, a mountain. I did this in LA too, quite often though, never really consistently. But I ran the mine trail into the very hard, weathered, true to its name, red soil. My blue Asics were an unrecognizable Pantone shade by the end of June. I had to consider the ground below me if I wanted to persist and progress. I learned that running uphill required me to tuck my ribs, breathe through my stomach, tilt forward at the hips, drive up my knees, and stay on the balls of my feet. I learned that my favorite feeling is lengthening my body back out when I'd run downhill. I also learned through trip and fall and scratch and scar that I must be just as diligent on the downhill as I was with the up. When I run down, I allow for longer, wearier strides with a heavier foot, but not so much so that I'm feeling the impact to my knees. It was also methodical and mechanical. I knew form made a difference on the hills, but was quite lackadaisical with the flat portions. Once I fixed my posture there too, I realized just how hard I had been making it on myself the entire time. My running posture is still something I have to be extra mindful of. From the ground up, I strike more often than I used to. A common misconception amongst myself and many other leisure runners is that your strides should be lengthened to cover more distance, which can be true, but I found that subtracting just a little bit of distance from my stride made me quicker and didn't overexert my hip flexors. I try to step just in front of my hip and then push off from that step to get me to the next. There's also common discourse amongst runners if you should strike
to the heel, heel toe.
When running flat, I aim to plant my foot just behind the balls of my feet, but not fully onto my arch. To a runner, this might all sound obvious and elementary, but it wasn't for me until about 400 painful miles in. I think I have the worst posture out of every tech-necked, phone-addicted, mouth-breathing, brain-rotted individual out there. Emphasis on how dramatic this sounds, my life changed when I shifted my hips from a downward sway-back angle and straightened them out forward to engage my core. I learned this through TikTok. Of course, no one in my life took the responsibility of telling me that my hip posture was the biggest offender of all my postural malpractices. What makes me laugh is that the only way I was finally convinced to fix it was because someone in the zeitgeist alleged that it gave you abs without ever having to do sit-ups. From this new and improved posture, I felt like I was finally breathing properly. I am a world champion mouth breather, so I mean this with utmost sincerity. However your breath goes in and comes back out doesn't really matter, so long as you're just doing it and maintaining proper posture. If you're ever out of breath, slow down or just stop. Who gives a fuck? Just breathe at any and all costs. And relax your shoulders. Every single run I have to tell myself to retreat my shoulders from my neck. Even riding this, I have to pull them back down. My shoulder blades are always fanned out across my back, all incorrect and insistent. I could run for miles without fatigue in my legs, but would have to stop because of a stupid pain in my trapezius. I ran into that instance a lot in the great valor of running 1,000 miles. I would be thrilled to run whatever absurd distance, except my body would whine over a side stitch or shin splint or shoulder tension that would all bring me to a halt. It was funny to me, because I'd never assumed it'd be the tiny portions of my body keeping me from running. I thought it would be the hatred towards running that stopped me first, but I really started to care about it. And I never wanted to rest. Well, never wanted to rest, and also had the looming end of the Gregorian calendar with many miles left to tick off. At the very end of August, when I decided to go for the full 1,000, I had run just a little over 500 miles. I spent the last 4 months of the year completing my goal. From January to August, I ran an average of 63.5 miles per month. And from September to December, I pulled the average up to 123 miles per month. I was running at least 4 miles a day, and sometimes 5 a day for a week, or 3 days in a row of 7-milers, and even a handful of half marathons. I ran 50% of my goal in 33% of the allotted time. I had no idea I had that in me. Not until writing this did I realize how much of my life was encompassed by running. It used to make me cry when I'd mess up in practice, and my coach, my dad, would make me run to the outfield and back over and over in an effort to make an example out of me, and I'm sure to dispel any ideas of partiality from my teammates' heads. I would jump out of the swing set in our backyard in an attempt to break my arm before a basketball game. I would throw up in the stadium bathroom stall from anxiety before my 200-meter race at a track meet. But for the first time in my life, I was running without consequence. I fell in love with the presence it commanded from my body. If something hurts while I run, I'm forced out of any daydream or frustrated spiral and shocked back into the present. I often tell myself when I'm in pain while running, do what makes the most sense, or do what's going to make this easier on you, or ouch, ouch, fuck, ouch. It is all a constant cascade of minor adjustments that I've found applicable to all parts of my life. The hurt that I feel has to come from somewhere, and if I go through a methodical checkup, I'll be sure to find the source. To me, the longevity of running is found in the balance of distraction and lack of consequence. It's pushing yourself while understanding your momentary limitations. Running 1,000 miles this year wasn't as easy as it would have been if I would have just run 2.73 miles every single day, or 3.8314 miles each day with 2 rest days a week built in. But I proved that I could show up for myself. I look at myself with fonder eyes as a result. It formed a milieu of self-regard that I carry with me each day since. It serves as a reminder on my runs. When I feel like giving up now, I know it's not a weakness in my body, but a lapse in memory that I can, in fact, persist. Also, I can't believe I read out of my diary. That's crazy, that's vulnerable. Thanks for watching.